He's definitely the one I would date.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah.
Apart from Josh Thomas, because I've married the equivalent.
You married Josh Thomas, yeah.
Michael Watson. Welcome to Psychocinematic, a podcast where we analyse depictions of mental illness and disability in popular films and TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Fornasia. If you love our podcast and want to give us some support, make sure you're following Psychocinematic Podcast on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And check out our website, psychocinematicpodcast.com. For access to special bonus content, episodes, early access, stickers, and contribute to our regular fundraisers, join our Patreon. Starting from $3.50 a month, you can be the coolest psychocinematic listener there is. Please note that this episode contains discussions of suicide and self-harm. If this episode brings up anything for you, Lifeline is available on 131114 or the Suicide Callback Service on 1300 659 467. But feel free to skip this one if you prefer. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast on today. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present, and extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from other communities who may be listening today. I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that we are living on stolen land. And welcome back to the podcast, Dr Elise McGlashan. How are you today?
I'm very well, Steph, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back in the podcast studio.
As am I.
And happy that it's a sunny day.
It is a beautiful day today, actually, but also not too hot, which I appreciate.
Yes,
don't cope well with the heat.
No. Before we get into what we're going to cover today, what have you been watching lately, Elise?
Well, I have concluded watching in a few number of days that I won't admit, The Split. Yes,
you talked about this with me multiple times over a series of texts and conversations.
Yes. So I originally got the recommendation from Shameless podcast, actually. They've spoken about it a couple of times recently, and I finally got around to starting it and then finished it very rapidly. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a BBC drama, and I would almost put it... I think the way it was sold to me was that it's sort of like a BBC crime drama, like the likes of Broadchurch and that sort of thing, but it's not really about crime. It's about a family of lawyers and all of the interpersonal conflicts and professional conflicts that arise in that scenario, which I feel like doesn't necessarily sound that good, except that I just eat up any BBC crime drama. So even if it's adjacent, I'm in, and I was very much in, and it is amazing. I did start watching it last night because I actually had time to watch something, and I got hooked in very quickly. And I remember one thing that you said was that there's so much acting without words, just looks. And you nailed that. Even thanks.
I think one of the very early on fifth scenes or something, there was a whole scene where no words were spoken, but you knew exactly what was going on.
Exactly. And it's not weird. It's not they just don't talk to each other ever. But everything just feels so authentic and sincere. And so it's just, the way that people actually communicate, which oftentimes is with their body language or their face, or even just the setup of a scene can make you feel so many things. And it's just, it's top tier.
Really good acting, and you hyped it up for me, but you delivered.
No, I was not afraid to.
The other thing that you hyped up for me that delivered is the podcast Normal Gossip.
Yes.
Tell the audience about that one.
Well, that one I came across, I literally had a TikTok come up, and it was the host of the podcast had stitched somebody's gossip story or something. And she was just FYI, if you like this kind of thing, I have a whole podcast that's the whole point of it is just to tell gossip stories. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm in. And it's essentially the point of that was the TikTok was not that, should not have been that convincing, but I'm very glad that I listened to it. So the podcast is essentially audience members or friends of friends will write in with their stories from their life of real gossip stories, not generally anything that involves anyone getting hurt or anything particularly terrible happening to anyone, but just really wild out there stories that are the sort of thing that if you have one of those in your friend group, you just tell everyone anytime something related to it comes up. And so it's just crowdsourced versions of that from strangers, and it is so good.
But it's told extremely well. Like, they're really good storytellers, which
Yes.
is sometimes hard to find.
Yes, indeed. Like the host will have a co-host on every week, and essentially the format is that she tells them the story, and so like,
And they comment.
and they comment and say what they would do at different points, and so you really like feel the story develop and unravel with them, and I think that's what makes it so engaging.
Yeah, and I listen to, I'm assuming there's more than one of this, like with 5 or 6 stories that people had actually spoken and sent in, and then they sort of pause and go, okay, hang on.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, the way that they do that is very funny as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. Just very, very funny.
Good recommend. And yeah, something a bit lighter, but also like, you know, themes come up that you sort of think about as well. Like they seem like very us kind of people.
Agreed. Good, solid discussions of human behaviour and choices and that sort of thing, but in a very lighthearted way.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. Thank you for that, Reco.
No worries.
What are we doing today, Elise?
Today, we're going to be talking about the series Please Like Me, which was created by Josh Thomas. So it aired between 2013 and 2017. So it was originally an ABC show, and then I think it got picked up by in Australia Netflix, in the US some other network rescued it for the final season, something like that. Not sure. Not important, really.
No, we don't care.
Yes. And the reason we're covering this is because Steph asked me to.
I feel like you mentioned it a while back, like you've got to cover this one. And also Everything Will Be Okay, which is very much centred around one of the characters and actresses who has autism. Yeah. And I think we should cover that eventually. But I watched this show years ago, and I think you even convinced me to watch it.
Possibly.
It's you do convince me to watch things I love. But I originally was really standoffish of even engaging in much of Josh Thomas's content because audience members out there who have not met Michael, Josh Thomas looks a bit like Michael and reminds me of Michael, who is co-host / husband.
Yep.
And I don't know, there was just a cut. The cut of Josh Thomas's jib was sometimes I didn't love.
I think it's a common feeling though.
Yeah, lots of people don't like Josh Thomas.
He's quite like a divisive person, like, despite not really doing anything controversial.
Just being a bit annoying.
But yeah, he just tends to be a person that some people just don't really vibe with.
Yeah. As is Michael. Just kidding, Michael. Everyone loves you.
Yes. But yeah, no, you are right, Steph. I tell a lie. This was my suggestion, actually. I just had forgotten because it was a while ago. But I think it is an exceptional one to cover. It's one of my probably top 5 shows of all time of any theme, as is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Yes. So you're really working through the list there.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't actually remember when I first watched the show. I think it was quite early, like around when it came out. I can remember watching the first couple of seasons in particular, like on ABC's website. Which
because wasn't it on ABC 2 to begin with, and then they moved it?
Yes,
to
I think
1,
so.
Because they thought, this is actually good enough.
Doing it right, yeah. Yeah, so I watched it like kind of as it was airing in the earlier days. And I think even then, when I probably didn't engage with media in quite the same way that I do now, in the way that I think about representations and things like that, I loved it. I was obsessed with the show. And then I think I lost track of where it was at for a little bit, maybe in the in-between where it got dropped and picked up by someone else. Yeah. And then came back to it at the end. But it is one of my very, very favourite shows.
Yeah. I think I only started watching it when season 4 had come out and come and gone. And I very quickly realised this is actually a fucking great show, and Josh Thomas is maybe a little bit of a genius.
I think so. Yeah. Unfortunately for all who find him irritating, I've never had that problem with him personally. I've always found him very funny and enjoyed his comedy.
He's definitely very funny.
And but his demeanour and everything just doesn't bother me. I like the funny accent. It's all good. it's all good with me. I liked everything he's ever done. Well, I don't want to. Everything he's done that I've seen.
That we've seen that, as far as we know, was all appropriate and above board.
Yes.
Well, I might go through the plot, which is actually quite quick in terms of plots on this podcast because I didn't want to go too deep because we will be here all day and night.
Indeed.
And it's really quite straightforward, the concept of the show. I reckon it's all about navigating. Basically,
that's a fair call.
It's a pirate movie, a show. So essentially, 20-something Josh gets dumped by his girlfriend, Claire, and then comes to the realisation, also in part thanks to Claire, that he is gay. He starts to navigate his new sexuality. Surrounding Josh is his mum, Rose, who has bipolar disorder and who attempts suicide a number of times throughout the show and is in and out of the psych ward throughout the seasons as well. We also see her navigating her mental illness, friendships, and relationships throughout it. Josh also tries to do his best to support his mum, even moving in with her while she's on suicide watch, while also trying to live life as a newly out gay man. Josh's dad, Alan, is navigating his newer relationship with May, as well as new fatherhood and trying to be a supportive ex-partner to Rose and dad to Josh. Then there's the relationships occurring with his ex and best friend, feminist Claire, and best friend and housemate Tom, who is also Josh's best friend in real life.
Fun fact.
Yes. Who have a bit of a fling before Claire goes to Europe, and Tom finds a long-time love with the similarly insecure but funny Ella. I really love Ella.
I love Ella too. I'm obsessed with her. I love Claire too, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ella's
probably a better person.
Ella's much better person than Claire. But anyway, throughout the show, we explore Josh's relationships. His first gay experience, dating the very pretty Jeffrey, then crushing on housemate Patrick, who I actually think is hotter than Jeffrey personally, but anyway.
Agreed.
And attempting an open relationship with Arnold, who he himself has an anxiety disorder. Well, there is a lot of growth and progress in Josh's life, including, with help from his dad, setting up a successful coffee stand in a nondescript Melbourne Riverside Park. I'm thinking it's maybe Port Melbourne or South Bank.
The top of South Yarra. It's
Yeah.
along the Yarra.
Right. That's an area I haven't explored very much.
Yeah, no, it's definitely along the Yarra, like Yarra Boulevard area, I think.
Right, okay. See, this is why we get a true Melbourneite on this podcast for this episode.
For slightly more accurate, vague geographical information.
I can pinpoint bits in like Northcote in the show, but nowhere else.
I could never.
But it could be any street sometimes in Melbourne. Things don't all pan out for the best on the show, as Josh's mum sadly does take her own life, leaving her house to Josh, who manages to buy his own apartment. The show ends with Josh and Tom, who has been dumped by Ella, eating pasta together, expressing empathy for both of their lives, but knowing that they will be okay. And as the show theme song goes, they'll be fine.
Great. Fabulous summary, Steph. Thank you.
I only took a little bit from Wikipedia because there was very little on there. I'm just going to interrupt this episode to bring you my first proper advertisement in this podcast. And if you know me, you know that it better be a good brand for me to be willing to back it. We can't all have incredibly gorgeous skin like Caitlin Stacey, who plays Claire in Please Like Me. But what we can do is access incredible skincare that also meets our values by being sustainable, ethically and culturally respectfully sourced, and based in science with a dash of herbal medicine through Ayurveda. Based in Silicon Valley and led by scientist Dr. Bhav Paldas, Codex Beauty Labs is committed to creating the highest standard in sustainable skincare and biotech plant-based alternatives. The products address key skincare concerns and conditions, including eczema, psoriasis, sensitive, dry and inflamed skin. The brand has been heralded by dermatologists for creating effective, clinically proven skincare that brings a new data-driven and transparent approach to beauty. Codex Beauty Labs is also dedicated to protecting biodiversity to ensure it flourishes for future generations. All products contain sustainably sourced ingredients from the forests of Patagonia to the bogs of Ireland. They're packaged in plant-based polyethylene tubes and work to reduce carbon footprint. The products are sold around the world in over 15 countries and territories, including right here in Australia. You know I like to bang on about mental health and self-care, and one of my favourite self-care activities is some grooming. Run a bath, pop on a silly TV show or podcast, pour a wine, and treat my skin to some nourishing. Join me in this self-care ritual by checking out Codex Labs' latest Shant, a collection of 4 products that address oily and acne-prone skin, which is perfect for my skin type. Shant, meaning peace and calm in Hindi, blends the best of Ayurvedic knowledge with plant stem cell biotechnology. Try the moisturizer, which refines skin texture and evens out skin tone. The Balancing Foam Cleanser, which controls oiliness by cleansing without stripping moisture. And try the Shant Refining Toner, which hydrates while reducing reddening, exfoliating, calm and purifying, and minimizing pores. The Shant Balancing Clay Mask builds on the others and improves uneven skin tone and helps brighten. And the Shant Balancing Oil Control Cream refines skin texture and tone, and calms and protects against environmental stresses. If that's not enough for you and you want to try some ingestibles, why not try Shant Clear Skin Probiotic Supplement, which supports both a healthy gut and skin microbiome, as well as help manage acne inflammation. And lastly, Shant Skin Distress, which is a daily powder formulated to balance anti-inflammatory plant-based activities with metabolism and hormone-supporting dietary supplements to soothe blemish-prone skin. Order one of the Shan products from Codex Labs today and use the code PsychoCinematic20 to get 20% off your order. Go to codexlabs.com.au and that code again, PsychoCinematic20. And now back to the episode.
So Josh Thomas, who plays Josh on the show, his own mum, as does his mum in the show, has been diagnosed with depression, so has experienced depression and suicidal ideation as well, and has also had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Yeah. So he has actually spoken quite openly about how he does draw on themes from his own life and his own mum's experiences in his portrayal of Rose, his mum in the show.
Yeah, I think his experiences of supporting his mum through those times has sort of led to him creating this storyline. So very much lifted completely from his life.
Completely.
Obviously not everything that happened to Rose happened to his mum, but he also mentions, we'll probably say this again, that he didn't want it to look attractive, suicide or mental illness. He wanted to tell it very honestly how it is. Yeah. So he very much took that from his real experience.
Yeah. And I think, so we'll talk a little bit about, I guess, Josh's own experience with mental health in a second. But even though, he's writing these characters, he's writing about his mum in the show with bipolar disorder, he has not himself experienced that disorder. But given that the show is really centred around his experience as her son and how he relates to her and her condition.
He's the main character.
I think he is very much drawing on some very real experiences and transplanting from his life almost.
And I think the relationship between Rose and him on the show seems very real. The relationship I imagine Josh has with his real mum as well.
Absolutely.
Like they have a really good connection there and very real sort of interactions between the two of them, especially in the hiking scene.
Yeah.
I really love that
That episode is beautiful.
And I think it's really great that even the things he didn't know that much about, he did a lot of research and a lot of consulting with lots of different organisations for.
Yes, it's
it's
very clear that he wanted to be very careful when approaching these topics, and even though he has this, personal experience, he didn't want to just go in and assume a bunch of knowledge about other, peripheral things. He wanted to make sure it was very accurate and also very, I suppose, not harmful. I don't know whether he went into it intending for it to be helpful.
I can imagine. He didn't intend it to be harmful, I'm sure.
No. He certainly went above and beyond to avoid any sort of harmful content or scenes for the community. He was definitely very careful about that.
And I guess in terms of Josh himself, the show is really about the difficulty of trying to fit in and wanting people to like you and really just being quite earnest and being like, just please like me, because I think there's a quote there, he says, I get up every day and I just don't want to harm anybody today. Yeah. Because in terms of his own experience, he's been diagnosed with ADHD at 28, so quite late in the game for an ADHD diagnosis. And then while making his second series, Everything's Going to Be Okay, which was through Stan...
I think it was through a US channel.
Oh, you're
primarily.
Right. Yeah.
It is on Stan.
Yes. Because there was a big focus on autism on the show, he had lots of consultants and psychiatrists to make sure he had a really good representation of autism on there. And then by the end of it, he's like, I think I have autism. Talked to us went through a big process of diagnosis. And there's a really good article that I'll link to where he talks about it. And then he came out with that autism diagnosis. And I feel like watching this show, in hindsight, you see signs.
Absolutely. It almost, he has said himself, that looking back at the show, he can see so much evidence of that undiagnosed condition in himself. And in his words, as far as a show about an undiagnosed autistic person goes, it's mint. And I would agree.
I would totally agree.
It's definitely him navigating those challenges or differences in himself without really having the skills or the support to do so, and the things that results in with his relationships.
And just trying to sort of muddle through adult life. And his friends are in similar boats to him for various different reasons. Looking back on it, a lot of people could relate to Josh's struggle with trying to fit in and know what to do as an adult, and a lot of these things happen to him and how to manage and deal with all of those things. And I guess a big narrative with that is coming out as gay and exploring that new life as a gay person, which I think, not having the experience of being a gay person, a lot of people related to as well. Yeah. And he said that, the gay person was based on me, so I didn't have to justify anything, I just do my thing. Yeah. No one could challenge him because it was him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which made it really honest, I think.
Absolutely.
I'll talk a little bit about the other characters. There's not much on Some there's heaps. Thomas Ward is, as we said, Josh's in real life best friend. He's actually not an actor, and they tried to audition people to play Thomas on the show, and in the end they're like, nah, it just needs to be you. But he's a bit of a comedian, and I've started following him on Instagram. He's very funny. Yes. I find him very, very funny. And the most hilarious that I didn't know this until like yesterday, is that he's been in a relationship with the actress who plays Ella, Emily Barclay, for like years now.
And have 2 kitties together.
And they're very cute.
They are so cute. Yes, I have known that for a very long time, and it really soothed me because their breakup at the end of the show is so sad. Like, it's such a real breakup. Like, there's no big thing that happens. No one cheats on anyone. Not that those things can be real as well, but it's just like a very real, you're in your 20s, you've just grown, and whoops, I didn't want this anymore.
Which happens to a lot of couples. It's also very realistic.
It happens a lot, and because you love them so much as a couple, it's so heartbreaking. And so I was so soothed to learn that they're actually together in real life.
Yeah. I understand that based on experience. So it's really sweet that they're together. So if you need some wholesome content to follow, definitely follow them.
Yes.
But that's all I really had on Thomas, because he's really the
not a lot
secondary
of
character.
Lived experience to talk about there, but he also doesn't have any diagnoses in the show.
No, exactly. He's just a bit of a drifter, isn't he? Doesn't really know.
He's just a regular 20-something-year-old man.
And sometimes a bit of a dick.
Which is a regular
27-year-old man. Still growing.
Yeah.
Debra Lawrence, who plays his mum, who's beautiful.
Beautiful.
I didn't know that she plays Pippa in Home and Away.
I was a Neighbours person, so I have no idea who that is. But
well,
I
was banned from both of them.
Fair enough.
But I did, when I was younger and went to people's houses, we would watch Home and Away, and it was like grade 2 or grade 3, and it would have been when Pippa was on. So go Pippa.
Well, I have no idea who that was, but I'm sure she was iconic.
She was like a foster mum. She was like one of the most loved characters on the show.
Okay.
Kate Ritchie. What was her name? Samantha.
I can't help you here.
She gets married and she came back to her wedding. Like, it was all very iconic. Okay. But beautiful. Having said that, not a Home and Away stand. Like, this is just a very small part of my life. Okay. I didn't hear much about her sort of personal mental health issues. Did you find much about that?
No, not particularly.
I know that she now teaches women in workplaces communication skills, and it's called Are You Being Heard? So it's teaching women to try and get their voice heard in male-dominated workforces, which I really appreciate.
That is beautiful.
Even though, we actually need men to shut up.
Yeah. The one thing that I did read about her is that I think that she did very much, she was very aware that she was playing lots of aspects of Josh's real mum, and she did do quite a lot of work to try and make sure that her portrayal was accurate, not to Josh's mum necessarily, but for the diagnosis and for the things that Rose is going through. And so I liked, she said on the matter that, Josh was keen to point out that my character was not entirely his mum. There were certainly some ingredients from Josh's real life, and he's kept some of those, but we've made a completely different cake.
I like how it's cake.
I know, me too.
It's very food-driven, this show
cake,
as well.
It is. It is. Fun fact that every episode is named after a particular, food or meal that they make in the episode.
Which I love as well.
It's so wholesome, and, that sounds kind of cheesy and silly, but it's not like the episode is always around baking. It's just it'll be at some point it comes up in the episode.
Like one of them's crappy sandwiches.
Exactly. It's just the food that is present somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did also read that she looked a lot into medication and how that impacts you, and some of the little side effects that she might be experiencing when she goes on things like lithium. Yeah. Like little lip trembles and stuff like that. So she's definitely a very conscious actress. Yes,
definitely.
And I think she just does a really lovely job.
She does. Really. She's just a really likeable and authentic character.
And she doesn't overact.
No.
There's a few moments I was especially in the beginning, I was like, I don't know how good the acting is. And then it just becomes really more authentic. Yeah.
Agreed. Caitlin Stacey, who plays Claire, so Josh's recent ex-girlfriend at the start of the series, come best friend, which is a beautiful relationship.
Very good to
watch.
I really like it.
She, again, doesn't really have any specific mental health diagnoses in the show, but she does have some experiences that are explored. So she has an abortion during the course of the show, and she has herself had an abortion before and has spoken about that. She's a huge feminist icon in my opinion.
Yes.
I don't know if it's probably a bit of a bold call, but I love her. I think she's a very vocal advocate for women's rights and equality and that sort of thing. So
I didn't know anything about her until I was researching for this, and I was like, oh, bitch, you are amazing.
She is amazing. I've always been obsessed with her.
Yeah.
I also just think she is so beautiful.
She is gorgeous. I don't think she realises how gorgeous she is, because when I first saw her, I thought she was one of those Australian Next Top Models.
Yeah.
That then went into acting.
I could absolutely see that. But
she's
no.
not.
And
She's just very good.
Great actor.
Very pretty. I did read that there was a big article that was with her talking about her activism and how she refused to. She was going to do a column somewhere, and they wanted her. It was about, she's developed a website called Herself, which is all about females being in charge of their bodies. And for this, there was like a editorial, and they wanted her to pose in like sexy lingerie for it, and she refused. So they like scrapped her from it. And she's like, "Do you not understand the whole purpose of what we're talking about here? And you want to like objectify my body? Like, hello." So I love her. And also she did mention in the same article that I was reading that she did self-harm as a child. No other context around that, but I think she does, have some of those experiences of mental illness that makes her, not explicit, but that makes her sort of understand the themes on the show. So she was a good addition.
Absolutely.
Hannah Gadsby, who we saw recently.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And so it was funny watching this show, like rewatching it and then going to see her. It's like, I feel like I've spent all week with you.
Literally.
She's great.
She also has spoken about her experience with depression, anxiety, and also relatively recently, I think in the last couple of years, was diagnosed as autistic.
Yes, I think it came out of when she became absolutely worldwide phenomenon after her Nanette Netflix special, which became huge. When throughout that, she learned that she was autistic, and then Douglas was the next special, which kind of explores that. Yeah. Which I was lucky enough to see in the flesh. Amazing.
But Hannah's character in the show, also called Hannah, it's really nice of them to primarily name the characters after the actor. It makes it a lot easier to follow. I'm usually getting very confused. I don't think we ever get a specific diagnosis necessarily for her, but it's very clear that she struggles with depression. Yes. Possibly also anxiety. Unsure if there's anything else going on there in terms of diagnosis, but she does also self-harm in the show. Yes, she does. And in real life, like, Hannah has spoken about having breakdowns, and that is something she mentions that happens to her in the show that leads her to go into the psych ward. So very much true to life. Yeah. She's also spoken a lot in her stand-up about trying to fit in and growing up gay in a country town of Tasmania where everyone's very sort of old school. So that themes of fitting in, which is very much about the show, is very much in her life as well. Absolutely. Just to ruin that pattern of people being named after the actor that's playing them. Keegan Joyce, who plays Arnold, so one of the long-term boyfriends that Josh has during the show. In the show, has some sort of anxiety diagnosis. I don't think we specify. Possibly generalised anxiety disorder. Yeah, or maybe just panic disorder. Probably a few. Panic disorder. Maybe a few different things, but certainly struggles with anxiety a lot. Couldn't find anything for lived experience with him specifically. He actually said that it was quite eye-opening working on the show because he hadn't really come across, I suppose, or hadn't had much experience in his life with mental illness before. And I found out he's not gay either. Oh. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So very little experience being gay either. Just a pretty face. Oh, there you go. He does a good job though. I think he's the prettiest of the boyfriends. He's definitely the one I would date. Yes. Yeah. Apart from Josh Thomas, because I've married the equivalent. You married Josh Thomas, yeah. Michael Watson. But despite that, he did do lots of research and tried to make sure he was really prepared to take on the role. And I do think it is a pretty good portrayal, given that he doesn't have that personal experience. And he has said that he does get lots of comments from people after watching the show saying that they can really relate to Arnold's struggles and that it's been good to see him sort of grow and change across the seasons, how he's dealing with his approach to his anxiety disorder and attempting to kind of overcome that and that sort of thing. Yeah. So that's positive. Yeah. Despite not having lived experience. David Roberts plays Josh's dad, and I just included him
because I thought there would be something about him, but all I learnt is that he's in the Matrix sequels, so good on him.
I didn't know that, but there you go.
I mean, who remembers it was Matrix Reloaded and the Revolutions, no one remembers those.
Yeah. I think the most relevant lived experience we could probably find for him is whether he has kids, because he is an iconic, awkward Australian dad.
And who can not relate to that?
He's so funny. He's so funny.
He's my dad to a T. Some of the things he's done, my dad has done. It's holy shit.
Uncanny. And then Renee Lim, who plays May, right?
Yes.
Cool. Very confusing with not being called Renee, but that's fine. Renee Lim, David's new wife, May, doesn't appear to have any sort of lived experience.
I reckon I could diagnose her, though, as an overachiever.
Yes, I think that would be fair. She's an actress, a dancer, a presenter, I don't know what that means, and a medical doctor. Ridiculous.
And she went, according to something I read, when she was graduating high school, she was like, I'm going to be a doctor on weekdays, a lawyer on weekends, an actor on the holidays, and a dancer at night. And she's essentially achieved that.
That is...
What, apart from the lawyer, which is there's not enough hours in the day.
Exhausting.
So exhausting.
And she's brilliant.
Yes.
She's brilliant in the show. She's one of probably, in my opinion, the most likeable characters.
Yeah, I love her.
She's the least... there's a couple of things where she messes up a little bit. But for the most part, I just find her so funny and so sincere and just, lovable.
I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot of actors on the show, so I think we'll leave it there. Let's talk about accuracy.
Yep.
So I guess in general, there's a lot shown on depression in general. There's quite a few of the characters that experience it, specifically Josh's mum, but mainly in terms of bipolar disorder. I guess in terms of that general depiction of depression, how do you think it went in terms of portraying it?
I mean, I think it's a very good portrayal. Spoiler alert, I think that pretty much everything covered in this show is done extremely well, and it connects with me very deeply. I think the depression one is difficult, but I think they've done a really good job of showing the different ways that depression can manifest. So we see it, like you said, with Rose, Josh's mum, experiencing depressive episodes. We also see it in Hannah, particularly when she's in the institution.
She's more that sort of, at times, more that catatonic depression.
Exactly.
Rose is more open to talking about her depression.
Yeah, it feels like Rose very much has those experiences of negative thoughts or cognitive biases. She's worried that everyone's being mean to her, or that, people are out to get her, and she's annoyed by everyone, and it's sort of...
Yeah, that irritability as
very
well.
irritable. Everything is too much, and she's very open and loud about that. Whereas for Hannah, like you said, she's much more sort of melancholic, withdrawn.
Definitely self-focused hatred, some of those negative biases towards herself as well.
But much more, just inward direction, whereas I feel like Rose expresses that a lot more, and it's kind of directed
external.
outward. Exactly. And so I think that's really great, that it shows, two very different, really, on their face value manifestations of this very... of this one condition, because that is accurate.
Yes.
It is 100%. Experienced in many different ways.
And it's even the little things, like the fact that when Hannah and Rose are living together, the washing piles up, the house becomes an absolute pigsty. Yes. They don't have showers that often and stuff like that. Those little details of how depression can affect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's seeing that, the fact that I think Hannah ends up moving out, how two depressed people in a house, even though sometimes it's really positive, can actually bring each other down. It can be that sort of household of that vibe,
absolutely.
That depressive vibe.
When they first move in together, it feels like a really good, hopeful idea. This is great. They can kind of look after each other and keep each other on track and that sort of thing. And in some ways it is good to have that other person who has similar struggles and is trying to deal with similar things. But at the same time, if you both get into a really bad place at the same time, that can have kind of negative consequences for both your general living situation and also your relationship with each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that decision to separate was a positive one for their friendship.
Yeah. I did want to note on that one that, when they do separate and they're not breaking up really, but kind of, when Hannah moves out and Rose is sort of yelling at Josh about it, that she's so upset that Hannah's left, and she yells at him, I didn't want her to leave, I wanted her to change.
Yeah.
And I just feel
true.
like that That could summarize like 60% of my therapy session. I just wanted them to be a different person.
I don't want to break up. I just want them to do this differently. Yeah.
Typically, not even necessarily talking about a breakup, just any interpersonal conflict.
Yes,
you know,
100%.
I just want them to change.
Yeah. Totally. I really like that line.
Yeah, me too.
In terms of bipolar disorder on the show, from my understanding, I feel like it was a pretty nuanced portrayal. You know, we do see a very manic experience that Rose goes through at the beginning of season 2, I think, where they end up admitting her to the psych ward.
Yeah.
It's manic, but it's not what we sometimes see in shows where it's like extreme behaviour. She, you know, goes and gets her hair dyed red, which is actually Pippa's hair was red, so it's probably more natural. Yeah. And also, by the way, the hairdresser is M. Rusciano.
That's so cute.
How cool is that? I was like, pause, like, yes, that's her. You know, she stops taking her medication because she's feeling happier, which is a very common thing that people in that manic state do, because like, I'm feeling happy, so I'll throw my meds away, and then it gets worse.
Yeah.
She's sort of got that agitated motor effects. She's moving constantly, talking constantly. She's got these grand plans, but they're not ridiculous grand plans.
No, she's just suddenly very motivated, very oriented towards sort of goal-directed behaviour.
Yes.
She's, you know, showing up unexpectedly places because she's got to announce everything. She's got to tell everyone her plans right away.
She wants everyone to focus on her, which is probably the more common garden variety mania that people experience.
Absolutely.
Rather than when you see big dramatic portrayals on movies and things like that.
Yeah.
So I really liked that. And then you see the depression that follows looking quite debilitating. We've already sort of talked about it, but you know, that it's not an extreme swing. We really only see one manic episode from her on the actual show.
I think there's probably a couple of other instances maybe of hypomania.
Yeah.
There's other periods where certainly, I think one of the things that gets really, really right is that sometimes when people think about mania, you know, we think about either very elevated mood or that agitation and the irritation.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it's hard to sort of imagine, if you don't have that experience yourself, how are those things two sides of the same coin? Like, how are we talking about agitation? Surely that's depression. Yeah. And I think we do actually see some hypomanic episodes where she's experiencing increased agitation in the show.
Agree.
And they're done very, very well.
Do you think that experience where she says to Josh, like, I'm in love with your dad,
I think so.
is a bit of mania?
I think so. It does feel that way to me.
Sort of like something that she wouldn't really think of or say when she's just in a sort of
No, she's
state.
feeling quite elevated, and I think she doesn't really feel that way.
No.
You know? Like, I don't want to, like, demean her feeling, but, you know, everything that we know from her from across the rest of the show, she's not still in love with him.
Like, she probably feels fondly of him, and she's misinterpreting that because she's in that manic state as love.
Yes, yeah. And they're reaching a healthier space in their relationship post-marriage, and that's being interpreted as kind of extreme.
Yes, definitely.
I would agree. I really like how they handle the switch between different states, because I think we also get from Rose plenty of periods where she seems euthymic. You know, she's certainly not either depressed or manic throughout the whole series. We also see her euthymic. We see her euthymic when she's dealing with very stressful life events.
Can you tell the audience what euthymic means?
Very sorry about that.
That's all right.
So euthymia is used to describe states for people with bipolar disorder, like between episodes, essentially. So periods of relatively stable mood and functioning.
Thank you, Dr. Elise.
Not mania or depression.
Yeah.
So we definitely do see that from her. We even see in the episode where they go hiking, like for me, she seems euthymic in that period of the show, but she's still experiencing grief and loss.
Yes.
And I think it's really lovely to see the range of emotions and the experiences that she's having there, and not have them sort of overclouded by just her diagnosis. Like, she's still a person who's having regular human experiences and can have regular human emotion responses.
Exactly. And she can have a very lovely relationship with her son.
Yes.
Throughout all that.
Absolutely.
And that's a really good episode of them bonding in a sort of balanced way.
Agreed.
She's quite rational.
Absolutely.
At that time.
Absolutely. I think it's a really fair portrayal. The other thing I was going to say is I think the temporal pattern, like the timing, that's a stupid word to use, but
no, it's just a technical word,
is really refreshing. So like throughout the show, you know, between seasons and things like that, sometimes we'll skip ahead in time, between episodes even. They're not always like directly chronological. Like they are chronological, but it's not always like, well, this is the next week. Like sometimes some time has passed.
Yeah.
And I really like that they did not portray the bipolar disorder as being like within the one episode of the show, that is.
Yes.
We're both manic and then we're depressed and we're manic, because it's not the most common experience.
No.
You know, you can have rapid cycling bipolar disorder, of course, but I think it was really refreshing that it shows, you know, maybe an episode or two where she's in one particular state, perhaps we have a period of euthymia, stable mood, and then she'll transition into depression, and it's not necessarily, I don't know, sometimes bipolar disorder in media can get reduced to like extreme moodiness.
Yes, yeah.
And I think they did a very good job of not doing that.
No, it's probably one of the most nuanced portrayal I think we've seen, particularly in a TV show.
Agreed.
And I think Josh's lived experience as well as research and consultation around that has really paid off for her.
Absolutely.
I really loved the discussion around medication too from Hannah and Rose around how having to sort of accept that sometimes you need to take the pills. And Hannah sort of says this quote, which I really like, that you take medication to get yourself out of a dark hole, but you end up just in a display home on an empty street. Which is like a really good way to describe how sometimes, you know, you don't feel the depths, but you also don't feel the highs. You're sort of in that
in between, just stuck neutral. Yeah.
And she says, it just hurts to know that I need to take pills simply to function. It's really painful. But then she says, I can't wait to be beige again, because she's going through a real depression at that time.
Yeah.
Like, you miss being boring almost.
Yeah.
Because it means you can function.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, it really highlights how difficult it can be when taking medication that, you know, sometimes it can make you feel empty or numb or, and not to say that that's the experience that everyone has, but it is one that some people share.
And for many, medication is very life-altering and life-saving for them as well.
Absolutely.
So.
But yeah, sometimes when you're sort of stuck in that numb feeling, you can forget that actually, you know what, this is preferable. This is still preferable.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I'm able to function. It may not be 100% the best all of the time, but it is a worthwhile endeavour. But that is a hard thing to accept.
Yeah, particularly with some of these more severe mental health conditions.
Absolutely.
All right, big trigger warning, everyone. Let's talk about the biggest portrayal on the show and the hardest thing to sort of go through, and the thing we don't see often portrayed so well on TV, which is the suicide of Rose.
Or portrayed very often. At all, to be honest. Yeah, I would agree. It's not often portrayed well, but it's also not often portrayed. And therefore, I think what we get left with is 13 Reasons Why.
Yes. Which
I hated.
Let's just not even.
I hated.
But I think, again, like Josh went from his own experiences, but also like wanted to set out to show a good representation, a more faithful, nuanced, true representation of a suicide. He consulted with the National Alliance on Mental Health and Black Dog Institute to make sure what he wrote was sensitive enough. What were your thoughts? And do you want to share a little bit about why it resonated with you?
Yeah, sure. So I think, part of the reason that this show resonated with me so much and why it is such a top one for me is because I do have a lot of personal experience which I can relate to. Interestingly, because I watched the show when it first came out for the first couple of seasons, that was actually prior to the majority of my personal experience. So I will stop beating around the bush. So I lost my brother to suicide in 2016. And so that kind of falls right in the middle of when the show was airing.
Wow.
And like, it's funny because I don't actually think about it like, oh, I didn't appreciate this before and now I do. I actually loved it at all times. But I think there's perhaps more nuance and more like specific things that are so heartbreaking to me now, having had that experience, that perhaps before I would have just thought, oh, this is very nice, but not really dug into it.
Yeah.
And so I find the portrayal, I suppose it's, you know, everybody's experience is going to be different, and his experience with his mum attempting multiple times across the series and then ultimately taking her life is not one that I can specifically relate to. I didn't have a several year battle with that ultimately led to my brother's death. But I think a lot of the feelings that he goes through and the discussions they have, so for example, when they do go away camping and they have those discussions about how Josh feels about her suicide attempts or how that affected him, are really relatable. Like, unfortunately, conversations I didn't get to have.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the content of them nonetheless is very touching to me, like resonates with me very deeply.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think in particular, the aspects of grief that they cover are probably some of the things that I cherish most about that show.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I rewatched it recently ahead of recording this. And I rewatched it with my partner, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's the best show. It's so funny. Like it's just so good." And I had forgotten
all the not so funny bits.
How devastating it is as well. You know, like I think of it as, you know, the end of the show when Rose passes away ultimately. Like that's the sad thing that I think about, right? The most difficult thing I think to watch. But I had forgotten how much there is throughout the show on loss and grief and depression and
even
self-harm.
And season 1, like when Aunt Peg dies.
Exactly.
It was almost like, experience this because it's going to get harder later on. Because that was devastating.
It was devastating, and it just gets worse in a good way. But like, it does get a lot worse. It was
almost like a little palate preparation.
Yeah.
So when you first watched the season finale, after everything had happened, how did that affect you then?
Oh, I was just hysterically crying.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have the exact same experience as Josh, but I think a lot of the feelings of just like complete shock and like your world almost falling apart did really resonate still. And every time I've seen the show in full probably like 5 times or so now. Like I've watched a lot. I love it. Masochist, I guess. And every time it makes me bawl. Like every time when he gets to the door of her house, before anything has even happened, I just,
awful.
My whole body tenses up and then I hysterically cry. And I think part of that is because I've watched it far too many times and I know it's coming. But I also think they inject a lot into that scene. Like, I feel like even not knowing what was coming, for example, like my partner hadn't seen it. And when we got to the beginning of that scene and he's entering her house, he also tensed up and he knew what was coming.
What was going to happen.
Because they somehow just, they just set it up so well.
Yeah. Like you hadn't heard from her for a while. They had that really nice dinner and then Josh is coming over and there's like lots of fun banter going on over the phone with Tom and Ella.
Yeah.
And then it happens.
Yeah.
It felt very
It feels
realistic.
like getting hit by a train. Like, it does. It just smacks you in the face. And I think that is a very realistic portrayal of what it, for me anyway, what it is like to find that out.
Yeah.
Let alone to find her. That's horrific. But yeah, to receive that news is just a completely life altering, but also just, in the moment, you just freeze, like. And
you can see his experience of like almost denial at first.
Yeah.
Like, well, this thing has happened.
Yes. Yeah. And he sort of like, he walks in and then he goes to leave and I think that like that instinct, it's very much like maybe if I just leave, it won't have happened.
Yes. Pretend that the last 5 seconds doesn't exist.
Yeah. I'll just go back outside. It doesn't have to have happened. That's not my life.
Yeah. I think he did it so well and so respectfully as well.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important and very brave of him to portray a character going through the ups and downs of bipolar and ultimately not surviving. We want feel-good stories. We don't want to deal with the reality of it sometimes. We want those tropes like love saves us all, She gets one therapy and she's better now. And I think it's really important to show that even with all the tools available, and this is in an article I'll share, she goes to the psychiatrist, she takes the meds, she goes to the psych ward, she has support, she stays in hospital, she moves in with a person so she's not by herself, she does all the things to try to stay alive, but in the end, the disorder, it ends up ending her life. And I think it's really important to show that it's not always something that we can recover from.
Yeah.
And it's no one's fault, and it's not one particular thing that happens.
Yes.
It can be a build-up over time before it gets to that point.
Yeah.
And also really shows how everyone is affected by that. In terms of Josh, obviously, and, Rose's ex-husband and everybody else, but also the people supporting Josh. Like, I really love that moment in the kitchen when Ella's like, Tom will suck your cock if you want and stuff like that, or give you a blowjob. And then as soon as Josh goes to bed, they're just like collapse in a heap. They're like, they're so hard, and you feel so bad for him. But they know they just have to...
They have to hold it together.
Hold it together for him. And I think that was really important to show too, just the ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I guess talking about in the immediate aftermath, his dad coming around.
That's what my dad would do. Like, what's in the fridge? Do you want the milk?
Do you want to take the milk? It's going to go off. You should take it. Don't want to waste it. And I think as much as, you know, in part that's like, haha, funny, classic dad, I think that's also a classic way that many people respond to a situation like that.
Older men,
particularly older men.
Like, what can I practically do? Because I cannot deal with the emotions of this right now. I just focus on what we need to have happened.
Yeah. And I think in terms of also, like, I guess reactions in the immediate aftermath, one of probably the things that resonated with me most about Josh's reaction is his, like, oscillating between being completely paralyzed, like when he's on the phone with Tom and Tom says, you know, well, you need to call someone to come and get her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And Tom's like, okay, I'll do it. And he's like, yes, like he needs people to do it for him.
Yeah.
And oscillating between that and then, like, making the choice to go and call Claire on his own and tell her.
Yeah.
Or, you know, taking the initiative to you know, call people and make things happen and do things. And then sort of retreating into that, like, cocoon of being paralysed and not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
That, for me, is very, very relatable. Like, in the aftermath of my brother's death, I definitely felt that as well. Like, I would have periods of just, like, don't want to talk to anyone, I don't want to see anyone. And I'm talking in the aftermath, like, you know, the 24 hours. I can't do anything. And then taking it upon myself to make myself the one to make really difficult phone calls or, like, organise things, because it felt like at least I could do something.
Yeah, it gives you something to focus on and achieve something.
Yeah, and then the next minute you're back to absolutely can't do anything.
Yeah.
Pretending it didn't happen almost.
Yeah.
I think Josh also, when he makes that phone call, part of him is doing it because he knows that it will allow him to experience the feelings that he needs to.
Yeah.
Because you try and, like, shut that down and go into a ball and have everyone else do everything, and I don't know if that's even really conscious, but you do get into this kind of, like, numb denial-ish state.
Yeah.
And doing something really difficult, like calling someone and telling them what has happened, is a really powerful way to break through that wall.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot help but then sob alone in your bed when you've done that. And I think I used a similar strategy, so good job, Josh.
And now you're talking about it on a podcast too, to just experience it that little bit more.
Yeah, it's all good.
It does sort of hark back to when Aunt Peg dies and he's trying to feel the feelings and then eventually he does, and it's like his birthday. Is it his birthday?
It is, yeah.
You know, it's sort of learning from that experience almost and...
Yeah, I'd never thought about that, but you're right. Yeah, he does have the same struggle with, like, he hasn't cried since Aunt Peg died until it's the day of her funeral, which is also his 21st birthday.
Yeah.
I've seen it 5 times.
Sorry. If I get it wrong, you will correct me.
And he sort of can't cry until he's sitting alone in a room at the funeral, and he finally, like, it all comes suddenly as a tsunami wave.
Yeah.
And he's just, like, sobbing at the table, and they come in to sing him happy birthday. And you're right. I've never really thought about that, but it is almost like he learns from that and purposefully does things to help himself feel what he needs to feel.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's a couple of instances where they're on a night out or something after that, and he, you know, they're sitting at McDonald's eating cheeseburgers, and he'll just start sobbing at the table. And I think it's really clear that he's made a lot of progress.
Yes, definitely.
Obviously, the loss of his mum is also much more devastating.
110%.
So that helps. But I do think it speaks to Josh's growth and his ability to acknowledge and sort of experience his feelings.
And it speaks to the support he has around him, that they sort of allow space too. Like, this is, Josh needs to have his cry, and we will allow that.
Absolutely.
Not everyone has people around them that feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I think it's really, like, that's a really nice portrayal, because ultimately a lot of the time people, when grieving and experiencing those waves, that's what we want. Like,
yes, yeah.
We want people who will just allow that to happen and not become extremely uncomfortable and like, oh, let me hug you so you'll stop crying. Or, you know, they're just letting him be how he is and acting normal.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's very helpful.
Yeah, they're great. And I love, like, in terms of loss and grief, one of the things that Claire says, I think it's Claire, who says this is just one of those things that's going to be shit for a while until it gets a little bit less shit, which is just a good way to describe it, because you can't, like, I think over the phone, like, she's all of us when someone tells us some really awful news and nothing you can say is going to make anything any better. And all the, common things that people say are like, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Someone I know was dumped recently and they're like, don't you dare say that you're sorry to hear that, because what? Why are you sorry? Like, but I am. Sometimes you don't know.
But do it internally, I guess. Like,
it's the things you say do not help. So something like that sort of phrase really nails it. Like, it's going to be shit. Just let it be shit. It's fucking shit.
Yeah.
There's no way of, oh, at least she's in a better place now or whatever. No, fuck off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really, as much as there's nothing good to say, the other thing that Claire says immediately before that quote, because again, seen it 5 times, she says, there's nothing I can say that will be helpful right now. And I think, ironically, that is the only helpful thing that anyone can ever say. Like, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. And just being honest about that.
Yeah.
Like, I know I can't help you right now.
Yeah.
I'm here.
It's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, really in the immediate aftermath, because that is, I think, when he calls her that time, it's the same day. I think it's supposed to be the end of the day when he's found her. Like, people are just not in a place for you to, is there anything I can do? Can I don't know. I can't think about.
Yeah, it's not something you can think about.
No. And there probably are helpful things you could do. Just make some food and drop it on the doorstep or something. To take that initiative. Don't talk to me about it.
Don't add more to that emotional plate. Exactly. How did you relate to, it's quite short because it's pretty much
the end of the series.
But that experience of grief for Josh.
I think the way that they portrayed, like I was saying, that he would just be in like a normal situation, sort of getting on with his life, doing normal things, and then just be suddenly overcome by a wave of grief, and then it would pass, and he would go back to living his normal life, and then it would come up again, and there'd be new sort of triggers, I suppose, for his grief that would come up.
I guess the fact that when he gets the house.
Yes.
And then he gets quite emotional.
Oh my God, that is an amazing one. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, that is a fantastic one. So he sells his mum's house for quite a sum of money and buys his own apartment. But when they're at the auction and they're all like, giddy with excitement because people are bidding and it's going to a really high number and it's really wonderful, and they're like waiting for it to be official so they can celebrate, and then, the hammer is whacked. I don't know what an auction.
Yeah, the thing.
I will never buy a house. But anyway, the auction's over, the house is sold, they've got a good amount of money. And they're like, okay, great, we can celebrate now. And everyone starts yelling and hugging and everything like that. And within 3 seconds, he's just sobbing.
Yeah.
And I think that transition of like happy memories sometimes becoming tainted.
Yes.
Because they are happening without the person that you've lost.
Yeah.
Is an extremely relatable experience.
And it's another loss as well. It's not just the loss of mum, it's loss of mum's house. And it's loss of the memories that were there, not being able to go back there ever again.
Exactly. I think, the house is a really good example of that. But I certainly experienced other things where, something good would happen, I'd get some good news, something exciting was going to happen, and I'd be happy for like a second, and then remember that, my brother wasn't going to be there to experience that. I can't tell him. Not that he was a chatty guy. He wouldn't care, but I would like to see him not care.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think, that scene for me, is partly about the fact that the house is gone, and that's very, very literal, like, loss of her, but also just about experiencing joy without that person being a very complicated feeling.
Yes, hugely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think thinking of, now Josh, he's got his coffee stand, he's got his house. Yeah. He's doing quite well for himself, and then knowing that his mum would be proud, but not being able to experience that pride
absolutely
would be devastating.
Yeah. And I think also maybe something that's not quite as relevant to my particular situation, but I've certainly felt, flavours of this, but him talking about how, like, no one else cares as much as he does.
About his mum.
Yes. This is, again, not really my experience. I have other family. There's many people that care a lot, but that is such a specific pain that I'm sure would have been extremely relatable, and certainly is very heartbreaking, even as a person not having had that exact feeling.
Yeah. There's really no one that was close to him.
No.
And for her as close to her.
Yeah, and feeling that responsibility to, like, carry on her memory.
Yeah.
I suppose, because it's all kind of on him.
It's a lot. It's a lot for a late 20s?
20s? I don't know.
20s, dude.
I don't know how long they are. How old are they?
Thank you very much for sharing
No worries.
that difficult stuff.
That's okay.
I love to mine my friends for their trauma. And today's no exception. Shall we move on to the depiction of anxiety? Because that's something we both have experienced.
Yes. So, I suppose the primary depiction of anxiety is in Arnold.
Yes.
So one of Josh's boyfriends, who, again, we don't get, like, a specific diagnosis for him necessarily. Seems like maybe, definitely has panic attacks, most likely generalised anxiety disorder.
Maybe some PTSD or something.
Maybe some PTSD. Possibly he is adopted and
yes.
does seem to have...
Yes, there could be some trauma attachment stuff in there.
Yeah, quite possibly. But it is really refreshing. So we meet Arnold, at a party, but he does spend a decent chunk of time in the show in...
The psych ward.
In the psych ward, yep.
I really like that he's in the psych ward because it's sort of against what we expect. Like, he's a young dude, quite an attractive guy.
Attractive young guy in his 20s.
In his 20s.
And also...
With more of a garden variety sort of diagnosis that we assume.
Yeah, like his anxiety is obviously quite
garden
severe.
Variety, but...
It is quite severe, but I agree. It's also something that I think a lot of people can relate to, and it's maybe not generally what we think of. And I think, I don't want to skip ahead too much, but I think it is very helpful
yes.
to see people with an array of diagnoses in a psych ward, because...
Of different sort of commonalities as
different
well.
Commonalities, different severities. Like, there's all sorts of different people with different things going on for them, and that's really refreshing.
What do you think of the portrayal, and this is what triggers me usually, of the panic attack in the show? Or there's a few, I think. There's more than one, I think.
There's a couple, but I assume you mean the one on the beach?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. I have a lot of feelings about that scene, but not necessarily about the panic attack itself. The panic attack itself I don't find triggering, but I think you do. So do you want to speak to it?
See, I didn't find it too triggering because it seemed a bit overdone.
Okay.
When I see a really well acted panic attack on TV, it triggers my anxiety.
Yeah, okay.
Didn't for Arnold. And I think you could, like, I'm being very critical of Keegan Joyce, who plays Arnold, but you can tell hasn't experienced a panic attack in his life.
No.
But that hyperventilation, you know, not a lot of people see, like, the throes of a panic attack, and that the fact it's a long one and it doesn't just stop with a magical trick or something like that. Yeah. Sometimes when you've got really extreme anxiety, your panic attacks can go on for a while and you feel like you're going to die for a long time. Yeah. It's really scary. So I think it's actually good to see it properly from beginning to end without any movie magic. But I just wish he acted a bit better. But it was good for me.
Yes,
in
sure.
terms of watching it.
Less upsetting. I think the thing about that scene that I don't like...
Yes, let's talk about that.
Personally, and this might be a little bit controversial, but I find it quite annoying because Arnold, up until that point, is doing quite well.
Yeah.
Like, he's... in this relationship, it's going pretty well. They're out on the town for a party, whatever. You know, the preceding episodes don't suggest that he's struggling necessarily from memory. It's not going to be perfect, but...
And has he come out to his parents at that point?
Good question.
You've got the encyclopedia knowledge.
No, I don't. I've got like specific phrases, but chronological stuff, very difficult.
That's okay.
I'm not sure. But anyway, he's going all right.
Yeah.
And then there's this awkward interaction where Josh runs into his ex-housemate who he was in love with, and the ex-housemate tries to come on to him, and that's what triggers
and
the
he's
attack.
very drunk, and
he's
like having to look after him.
Off his face, like, you know, Josh has to go into the ocean and get him out so he doesn't drown.
Yeah.
And I think it's very clear from the situation Josh is not into it, and they're just, like, helping this person not be left on the street in an unwell state.
Yeah, it's not anything that he needs to worry about in terms of feelings.
No, but for somebody who struggles very badly with anxiety, I can see why it would triggered the attack. Yeah. But immediately after the attack, Josh is like, what do you want to do? And he goes, I need to go to the hospital. And I just find that so frustrating because... Maybe if there'd been more build-up of, like, Arnold's having a really terrible time and then this happened and that's the last straw,
yeah,
then I
there
could
wasn't
see
as
that.
much, like, I feel like maybe there was an internal build-up.
Possibly.
But there wasn't as much
Yeah.
described of
Yeah.
maybe a build-up to get to that point
Yeah.
of being like, nah, I've got to go to hospital.
Yeah. And on one hand, I love that he says it casually because I think it's a really important part of treatment for lots of people and it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. But on the other hand, I just think, like, I think it's indicative of this, like, weird relationship he has with a psychiatrist that's perhaps not that
Maybe
helpful
a bit
and productive.
codependent.
Quite codependent.
Yeah.
And that, like, she's not really equipping him with good coping mechanisms or, like, you know, a plan for when these sorts of things happen, of steps we can take rather than just, like, I'm going to the hospital.
Exactly, yeah. It's clear that he's had treatment for a while.
Yeah.
And outpatient treatment as well as inpatient treatment. And his psychiatrist obviously knows him quite well. So the fact that his immediate response to one panic attack is hospital suggests that he hasn't been appropriately skilled up to be able to manage independently.
Absolutely.
And go to particular, you know, strategies before going to hospital.
Yeah.
And that is concerning given that he's had so much treatment.
It is very concerning. And especially that it's not just that he says, like, in the moment, in the panic, I need to go to hospital. It's legitimately like, well, I don't think we can go in the middle of the night, and then they wait till morning and he goes. Like, it's like it passes and that is the plan.
And he's still going. Yeah. But it's actually in that interview with Hannah Gadsby, she talks about the difference between a meltdown and a panic attack. When there's a meltdown, you're like, it's like a cleansing. It's like your body's reset. So like an autistic neurodivergent meltdown once it's over, you can feel much better. When you've got a panic attack, you're kind of still in that. It's like a hangover after a big night or after a migraine. I get sort of migraine hangovers. It lingers for a while and it's almost like you're in that state where you could
Feeling
go again
unsafe.
very easily.
And
So for him, like, safety is hospital. So he just wants to be in a safe space and that is hospital. So I can understand him wanting to go there. But yeah, he's obviously has a lot of work still to do on his anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's my clinical interpretation of that.
Yep. So one other thing that I really liked, sort of an aside, but there's a scene where I think Arnold actually disappears for a few days and then he shows up in the middle of the night drunk in Josh's bed and says he loves him, which concerning, but whatever. But he's very drunk and Josh is awake, but he pretends not to hear it.
Yes.
And then the next day, Josh sort of gets the courage up to tell Arnold that he loves him. And Arnold has, like, a very averse reaction of, I'm not ready to say it. I'm not going to be forced into doing things I'm not comfortable with. Like, you know, trying to set a boundary, which he has the right to do.
Yes, yeah.
And Josh asks him to leave, basically, and says, like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And Arnold's like, well, that's not fair. Like, I don't want to, you can't force me to do anything I'm not comfortable with. And I think, and Josh sort of holds the point and asks him to leave and needs that space. Yeah. And I think it is a really nice, like, non-literal, they didn't have to say what they were saying.
Yeah.
But way of communicating that, like, having a mental illness or having mental health struggles does not mean that your partner or the other people in your life's issues and needs are not important.
Absolutely. Good, really, really good point.
Yeah. Thanks, I agree. But really, because it's almost like, you know, particularly because Arnold does have this weird codependent relationship with his psychiatrist that we'll probably talk about if we have time.
Yes. Next, please.
But it's almost like Arnold has been taught within that relationship that his needs are the most important and that he needs to protect himself and his well-being at all costs. And so he's sort of like a bit bratty when Josh tries to set his own boundary of, well, this is a need that I have, please leave.
Yes.
And I think that was really helpful.
Especially given, you know, Josh's needs, like, they're in this open relationship and clearly, you know, whatever Arnold was doing at the time wasn't with Josh. You know, Josh has his own insecurities around that. He wants to allow Arnold to have the type of relationship he wants. But Arnold is really quite selfish throughout that relationship because he's not really acknowledging Josh's needs. He doesn't text back and then he confuses him by saying, I love you, and then being like, no.
Yeah.
So, you know, Josh is absolutely correct to be like, no, fuck off.
Yeah.
You know, and that is separate from any... You know,
Anxiety
also,
disorders
he can be supportive of his mental illness while also putting himself and his needs as a priority as well.
Absolutely.
So I think on that note, we should talk about Arnold's psychologist.
Yeah, okay.
Because we've been talking about it anyway.
We have.
She just doesn't seem to have boundaries, and I would not be doing what she's doing.
She's extremely problematic. End of discussion. No, so she, as we've kind of already talked about, there's a couple of things that come up which are quite problematic. So the first indication of that is that when Josh and Arnold decide to go on a date officially for the first time, she wants to meet him. And so she organises to come by his coffee cart so that she can meet him.
And, like, assess whether he's good for
Arnold.
Which is just so inappropriate.
So incredibly inappropriate. And then Josh's family there, and it's a big kerfuffle, and it's very embarrassing, and she clearly doesn't approve. And then she tells them she thinks that they need to go somewhere safe with other people and that they shouldn't be alone. And it is just such an overstep.
Also, if for an anxiety disorder, that would be worse to me.
Agreed. Yeah, not good.
Like, they seem very enmeshed. She's almost a parent figure. That's what a parent might do when you're a teenager. Also, like, there's no reason in any of my private work or, work at schools, and even then, that you would meet a partner unless A, they asked you to and they wanted them to come in for a session, or B, you were discharging them into their care, or C, that you were going through a safety plan with them. So they needed to do something to make sure that person was safe.
Yeah.
There's no other reason why you would need to meet a partner who isn't even a partner yet. They just have it going on a date.
Yeah. There's no reason to meet someone they're going on a first date with.
Which is a big red flag for the whole of Arnold's treatment. Like, she's like the anxious parent making her child anxious.
And I think I remember there's a scene where after his panic attack, when he decides to go to the hospital, they meet her there in the morning, and it's kind of like, I'll take it from here, from Josh. Like, she's literally...
No.
Oh, it's so...
Josh isn't his carer, A, and B...
Like neither are you?
Where's your non-judgmental persona as a psychologist? Thank you.
Yeah.
In contrast, love Josh's psychiatrist, played by iconic Debra Lawrence, who I absolutely love. She's, obviously it's a different context. She's really just going through some grief counselling with Josh, which he's not even sure, he needs, but he gets something out of, it seems. Yeah. And she's very gentle. She, doesn't always understand. I feel like she's understanding of him and why he uses humour to sort of cover up his emotions, but also humours him at the same time, laughs at his jokes. Yeah. And then I love how she fires him at the end, which is a really good portrayal of, therapy sometimes doesn't have to be forever, and sometimes it's not like there's an obvious goal. It's just like, I think
you're okay.
You're doing okay, and we could sort of stop seeing each other as much. Yep. I have exited sessions very similarly to her. I think, how would you feel if we just, took a little break or
cut back a bit?
Yeah, and see how you go without me.
Yeah, very realistic and
beautiful.
Yeah, really nice, and humorous relationship that they have that is obviously helpful to him.
Yeah, for sure. Just before we move on, do you think, from your experience, the actual institution itself, I don't know if you've had any experience in psych wards or institutions.
I've visited.
I've also visited, that's about it.
Yeah, and that's about it as well. But from that, it seemed relatively accurate.
It looked quite similar to one I've been to.
I think it was a real one.
Yeah.
I know that one of the hospitals... Nicholas recognised.
Oh, really?
It's an actual... actually, it's one that he was working on.
Oh, there you go. We won't say the name on the podcast.
No, I think that was it was a hospital, different context. But anyway, so it probably is actually a ward that's been used for something similar. And I think it seemed quite accurate. We didn't see a lot of, I suppose, therapeutic components.
We saw some group stuff, they were doing some group exercises,
which is really common.
Yeah,
but not too many, not a lot of group
therapy. No,
which is pretty common.
But I'm glad they didn't show that because A, it's personal.
True.
That's good that it's not just there for everybody to see, because it would be a personal thing, and B, I think it was more important for the relationships that we see how everyone interacts in there. And it's so much more realistic than what we see in movies and TV shows often, in that they're just humans gathered together, they eat their dinner, they have chats, they play hide and seek, they have freedom.
Yeah.
And it's not this really police institution like you expect it to be. Yeah. It's probably more like high school or boarding school.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So I think it was pretty reasonable.
And Josh did do a lot of research into, in particular, psych wards and institutions. And the general consensus was that it was a revelation, in quotes. So it was a very good portrayal.
Okay, well, that's good.
And he toured a clinic in Melbourne and consulted with a psychiatrist there, so that's good.
Very good.
Just a couple of last things to talk about. Firstly, abortion, because that's a very big part of season 3.
I think it's season 3. Again, chronological.
You're supposed to know.
Not my strength. Quotes.
And I really like how they portrayed it. It was very well received. Lots of articles talk about how it's just breaking new ground. Josh did do a lot of research. He co-wrote it with his female co-writer Liz Doran. They spoke to family planning clinics. A lot of them, women that he spoke to who saw the show, he says girls, that's just him.
Yeah.
He calls women girls. Were like really caught off guard by how much it got to them, or whether they had one or someone had that one, even though they don't regret it. It shows those emotions really well, I think. What did you think?
It does. I thought it was brilliant. So hopefully everyone's seen it because we've spoiled the entire show now. But it is a whole episode basically dedicated to everything that comes up from Claire. So it's Claire that has the abortion, Josh's ex-girlfriend / best friend. She's gotten pregnant by somebody who we don't know. We think it was maybe in Germany when she was in Europe. I can't remember.
Yeah, I guess.
Not the point.
No, and as you said to me, I love that we don't know who the dad is and it doesn't matter.
It's not the point. Because I think as much as, like, abortion is not something that is portrayed super commonly, if it is, it's always like, that choice of, like, will we keep it, will we not? Like, that's the one struggle that we see portrayed, and it usually is very much involving the father or the person who's gotten the pregnant person pregnant. Yeah. And that's fine, and that is a struggle to be seen and you know, that probably resonates with people and everything, but I really, really loved that he was just irrelevant to the situation.
And even the decision.
Yeah, the decision was nothing to do with him.
Something that needed to be debated. There's a moment there where she's like, maybe we could raise it together, Josh.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was just...
And I think even that, though, like, that's the whole thing, is it's all about her experience and how she is processing it. And part of that for her is that, maybe I will keep it and Josh and I could raise it. We'd be great. That'd be fun. But it's mostly about her internal struggle and the impact that it has on her. And yes, one of my favourite quotes from the entire series... oh, God, I can't even remember it now. Anyway, no, I can remember it by heart. It's okay. Don't worry. Is that she says they go through this really wholesome scene where they're eating fried chicken and they're each going to talk about their feelings and not judge each other and just, like, say what they're thinking. Josh says he was thinking about keeping it and had picked out outfits and things like that. And Claire says that she thought her politics would protect her from her feelings. But
she was wrong.
She was wrong. And I think that is a really common experience, particularly, you know, and given what Josh said of, you know, a lot of the people that they spoke to about this topic had said that they were really caught off guard and really shocked by how much it affected them. But I think it was a brilliant portrayal of how you can so strongly believe in something and believe that it is the right choice for you and it's the correct thing to do, and it can still be really difficult.
Yeah, which I love. And they really went through in quite detail, which I don't think we've seen in anything else.
Absolutely not.
What actually happens during the abortion process.
Yes.
She takes this pill. She goes home, she takes this pill. It's going to be painful at this time. It'll be over by this time. Yeah. I don't know if the timeline was accurate, because I know some people who go through the, you know, withdrawal process a lot longer than she seemed to. Yeah. But yeah, it was the most realistic actual process I think we've ever seen.
Agreed.
Lastly, in terms of accuracy, I just want to talk briefly about the self-harm, which is another big trigger warning, because it's probably one of the hardest things to watch in the show is seeing Hannah self-harm, and we see her self-harm.
Agreed. Yeah, it's extremely confronting.
Yeah, I kind of wish they'd put a trigger warning on that. I mean, you know...
The whole show
needs one, but, you know, I didn't expect to see it, and I'm someone who has self-harmed, and, you know, it was not triggering in terms of self-harm for me, but, you know, anxiety and feelings attributed to it. Yeah. But it also made sense to me how they show it. Like, she's not doing it to get a high, which some people expect from people who self-harm. It's not done in a way that's giving attention to anyone. She sort of, it's like a ritual for her. She retreats to her room. She's very shameful of it. She has a lot of guilt over it, and she engages in it, and it hurts and it impacts her day. But she's in a real depressive state, and she's driven to do it.
I think, a really common common stereotype with self-harm, particularly for those of us who grew up with the like emo generation, etc., all of us in the room, is that, you know, a lot of adults and stuff are very hysterical about like, oh, they're just looking for attention and whatever. Like, it's just like, I don't know, you know, they're just doing it to get people to pay attention to them and to be dramatic or to get sympathy or whatever it is. And I think it's an extremely good portrayal of how that is in the vast majority of cases. I mean, I'm a very strong believer that if somebody is willing to hurt themselves for attention, they should probably get that attention.
Yes, 100%.
Probably a valid request.
There's a problem there with the attention, not the behaviour.
But anyway, in this case, it's very clearly not that. Like you said, it's very shameful. She retreats. She tries to hide it from everyone.
And I love that it's, you know, we always think of self-harm as teenagers. And Hannah's, you know, in her 30s. Yeah. And that is common with mental illness. Self-harm affects literally every age. Yeah,
absolutely.
Hopefully not babies. Have we gone through all of our depictions? So. Oh my goodness. All right, we'll quickly go through stereotypes and self-harm. In terms of stereotypes, it really smashes so many stereotypes. The stereotype of mental illness generally, severe mental illness, you know, mental illness requiring hospitalization. Particularly with Arnold's character, he's young, he's hot. He's sexually active, he's dating. He is not monogamous, he has a desire for sex. We often think of mental illness and, you know, really extreme mental illness, we don't think of those people as like wanting a relationship.
Absolutely, yeah.
The love is not the answer to mental illness. You know, Arnold's mental health, he doesn't actually see Josh as being helpful.
No.
Which is a shame. But, you know, love isn't the answer. Suicide, not one thing causes it. A lot of things happen that lead to that place. Also in the institution, so many people in there are voluntary. It's not like they're against their will and this is a horrible, restrictive place for them. It's a place that they want to be in to heal and feel better.
And that it's helpful, that they feel safe in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think on suicide as well, another suicide in the show that we didn't actually touch on is Ginger, who's one of the other people in the institution. And I
played by Denise Drysdale.
Yes, brilliant character, amazing. But I think even having two suicides in a show is a lot.
And that's not all the deaths too.
And it's not all the deaths.
There's also a bunny.
There's also Aunt Peg.
Yes.
But I think even the way that those two situations are very different, like Rose's circumstance and how she chooses to take her life, and Ginger's are very different.
Yes.
Like it's not, like you said, it's not one thing. There's not one formula that leads somebody to that choice.
And Ginger doesn't present as typically depressed.
No, she doesn't.
She's very up and down. She's very, she kind of jazzes everybody up.
She does.
Gets
She's
stuff
like
happening.
Quite energetic.
Yeah.
And like kind of a go-getter.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely not what you typically think of, but it's still realistic.
Do you think Ginger was... I got just some hints that maybe she was borderline personality disorder, perhaps?
I think possibly. I could see that. I think she claims bipolar disorder in the show, but it's actually unclear to me whether that is meant to be a sincere thing. Like, it's when she's trying to bond with Rose when she first arrives, and she's like, oh yeah, me too, we'll stick together because we've got the same diagnosis kind of thing.
Which also could be a borderline trait to lie and manipulate so that you get stuff from other people.
A little bit.
Which is a bit of a trope that I've just given, but, you know.
It is, but it is her, like, I could see it being her just, like, trying very hard to bond with Rose.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if she actually has bipolar disorder or, something else.
She does also call herself a sex addict.
She does.
Yes.
That's true.
So.
Again, not clear if that's a joke.
She also could just be in a manic phase.
Yeah. Look, don't know. She could be lots of things. But anyway.
It doesn't matter. She's not the central character. No. But yeah, it was really good to see her and how that affected Rose. And Josh does say that he wanted to show how a suicide, how Rose processes someone else suiciding that she was close to, and recognising the responsibility that you give to everybody else if you do go through with it.
And the pain and the anger that Rose feels.
And how...
and how she reflects on her own attempts and how that that might have impacted Josh, and she's asking him questions about how it made her feel. So I think it's a very helpful portrayal of, I guess, the waves of how suicide can affect many, many people.
Yeah, definitely. In a non-stereotypical way.
Yes.
I also love that we see a really loving, healthy, I think, sweet relationship. Josh definitely becomes the parent towards the end of it rather than the other way around, but we all become parents of our parents in the end. Let's be honest. Despite wanting to end her life doesn't mean she didn't want to be there for Josh. He got lots of love from his mum. She gave lots of love to Josh.
Yeah.
I love how that wasn't questioned at any point.
No. And she was never a burden.
No, he never saw her a burden.
No.
He wanted to spend time with her. The only thing getting in that he didn't like about living with her was that bringing boys home, basically.
Yeah, it's awkward.
Very awkward.
Even though she's a cool mum and he totally can.
Yes. Again, the stereotype of abortion, like, it is a big deal, but then it's not a big deal.
Yeah, agreed. So it does a good job of combating that.
Yeah,
I suppose.
that stereotype.
It doesn't have to be that big of a deal. It does have an impact on Claire, and she is upset, but she also moves on with her life.
Yeah, she doesn't regret it.
No.
Yeah. There's a few things I thought would become stereotypes, but turn out not to be. Firstly, when we first meet May, and his dad sort of keeps her in the car, and it's very much like older Australian man dating a younger Asian woman. Like, that is a trope, that's a stereotype. That is sadly a common theme where some older men actually seek out younger Asian women, particularly from other countries. I'm not just saying that's a stereotype that happens. But she was a very fully fleshed out character. They had genuine love for each other.
Yeah.
She's very likeable, and they have a solid and quite complex relationship
They
too.
do. Agreed. It's wonderful.
And she also has a great relationship with Josh.
Yeah.
And
they also actually do face a bit of, like, I guess people challenging their relationship based on that stereotype.
Yes, they do. Yes.
And it is really nice to see defend his wife lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
He does really love her.
He does.
They don't always give each other what they need.
No.
It was a very
many
true
people
to
do in
life
many
relationship.
relationships.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Exactly.
I also love how she ribs him.
She does.
Reminds me of my
She's
aunt.
so funny. She's so funny. I love her so much. It also is at risk of having that sort of, like, I don't know if this is the original, but it's always the example I think of like, the Friends phenomenon of, like, they live in these, like, huge New York apartments.
Incredible.
That would be extremely expensive, and there's
Sex in the City.
Sex in the City, and there's no explanation of how they pay for that, despite none of them working high-paying jobs.
In a very, like, hipstery town in
Yes. So,
Melbourne.
in Please Like Me, it's that they live in this, like, quite big share house with, like, two guys who don't seem to really work.
I think, well, Tom, you see him work in the first episode.
True, he has an office job,
Yeah.
but Josh
Works for the
doesn't seem
government.
to. He's a student, and then kind of gets his coffee cart and whatever, but, neither of them appear to be,
Rich.
raking it in. But it's actually...
Explained.
It's explained. It's Josh's dad's house, and he basically lets them live there for free. So,
And much more accurate and true to life.
Yeah.
Probably the case for anyone in Josh's position is that their parents are funding it.
Exactly.
And I also love that because we love Josh, but he's very flawed, and he's not the most responsible person. We all know a guy out there who doesn't really work, just lives plugs away. He's got, like, a degree that he doesn't really go to the lectures for, and it's a bit of he's just like, get your shit together, mate. And his dad is like, get your shit together, mate.
Yeah.
My dad's like that.
Yeah, get off my back.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
Very true to life.
Very much so.
Well, that's stereotypes, I think, because I think there isn't really many.
No, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's pretty
can't
good.
name one. What do we think is... I mean, we know things are helpful. Everything in here is helpful, let's be honest. Yeah. But in terms of mental illness, what about it do you think was helpful?
I think the most helpful thing about this show is that it is objectively, without a doubt, a show about mental illness, right?
Yes.
Like, it is, but at the same time, it is also just objectively a show about life and about being a young person and about navigating relationships.
Yes.
And that kind of thing. And it's because those two things are the same thing. These experiences are common.
They happen together.
They happen together. We will all know people, and I think he did a really good job of including so many different portrayals of people with mental health problems or conditions, and it not feeling like... It's not like they were trying to fill up every role with someone with that. It all felt extremely authentic and realistic that, like... Yeah, people probably do have about this many people in their life that have struggled with these things.
Yeah. And there are people in the show that don't struggle with anything particularly.
Exactly, and that's what I mean. It's sort of like a realistic, like, yes, there's many, and it's wonderful, and it's objectively about that, but at the same time, it's about life, because that is what life is like.
Exactly, yeah. 100%. And each depiction of mental illness in the show is varied. There's different ones. There's the same, but they look different as well. It's different processes, mental health processes, different processes of grief.
Yeah.
There's no beginning and middle and end of those experiences too. It's one person's journey here and another person's journey there. For some there's an end, but for many there isn't.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah. And you don't get that kind of icky, like, triumph at overcoming.
No, none of that. It really subverts all mental illness tropes.
Yes, it does.
And like I said, in terms of suicide, Josh went to the real trouble of not showing a suicide note, not showing the act itself. You do see her cold corpse on a morgue, which is quite unpleasant to look at. He really wanted it to not look fantastical or like you get some sort of redemption from suicide or glorified in any way. And I think he really nailed that.
Agreed.
We've talked about how it's really helpful for abortions, and there were a lot of articles there that said it was really a helpful depiction of abortion. The actress who played Claire, Caitlin Stacey, is really proud of that depiction as well, and she's talked about her own abortion, just really good. I've been trying to ask the question at the end of helpful versus harmful is who is it for? And I feel like this show is really for everyone. Like,
I agree.
Josh didn't set it out for a particular audience in mind. He just wanted to portray some things. Yeah. Whereas some things we're like, this is for the disabled community or mentally ill community, this is for the neurotypical community. I think everyone can take something from that.
Agreed. It is for everyone. It's for human beings.
For human beings, yeah. Because it's really about how Josh responds to a lot of things, which everybody can relate to.
Absolutely.
Is there anything harmful in this show?
Look, I think the one thing about this show is that the characters are not always likable.
Yes. Sometimes they're terrible.
And I struggle with deciding whether that is harmful or whether that is just realistic.
Yeah.
Like, they're not always likable, but
and
that's
a lot of my favourite shows are really unlikable characters.
Exactly. Like, some people are great sometimes and shit other times. Like,
I think what makes it hard in this one is it's so relatable and we see ourselves in a lot of these characters so that when they say something inappropriate, it's like, oh, no. For example, Tom... I think someone uses the R word at one point. I think maybe it was Josh.
I think I do remember that. Yes.
And
That's not good.
Don't do that.
No, we don't do that.
There's a bit of badly aged ableism in it in some ways. Like Josh goes on a bit of a random rant about how he really thinks he could date someone who's disabled.
I think, like, that's one of those things, though, that I'm like, even at the time...
I think it was, like, episode 1.
Yeah, but even then, I feel like, sure, weren't we meant to dislike that? Like, weren't we meant to be like, oh, what an obnoxious person?
Yeah.
Like, maybe I'm just seeing that through my own lens, but for me, some of, like, saying things like that, I was just like, oh, God, like, an idiot kind of thing.
That, if I had seen that, maybe I did catch a bit of the show and it was that sort of early on, I was like, bleh.
Yeah, fair enough.
It also, now seeing the whole show, it's kind of Josh in his early stages where he hasn't grown. So... Josh, who hasn't grown, probably would say something like that.
Probably.
We know people who probably has said something like that, who are now better people than they were in their early 20s or whatever.
Well, some of them aren't.
Or some of them have not changed.
So there's also a scene where he goes on a date with a First Nations person.
Yeah.
And it's extremely uncomfortable.
It's really awkward.
He's really weird. Like I think he's doing that thing of trying to be like the good white man of highlighting how terrible and racist people are, but actually you're just kind of you're making it so uncomfortable for everyone.
And making it more of a thing.
You're making it about you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like how good you are for not being racist.
Yeah,
and
look at us not being racist. I'm dating you. You're black. Yeah.
I do feel the same about that scene though, that I'm like, I don't think he wrote that because he was like, look how good I am, I'm not racist. It was supposed to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was trying to highlight casual racism. Like, it's a conversation about, this is what people of First Nations get, even from people who call themselves like
progressive and
allies.
Yeah.
But it still makes me feel yucky.
Yeah. Agreed.
And Tom, the character, is just a bit of a misogynist and treats women a bit badly.
He is.
Like Neve.
Yeah.
She was so badly treated.
I really dislike her, though. Like, I really find her awful.
But I feel like she's probably the only caricaturistic character in the show.
Do you think? Because I think
she's like the crazy ex-girlfriend.
I know, but I think she makes me cringe so much because I've known girls like her.
Yeah.
I don't think she is caricature of women. Like, she's not meant to represent
surely
everyone.
She must represent someone in Josh and Tom's life, because this is
and
all
I think I know the same person. And so I really disliked her, but I agree she is treated terribly. Tom is not good to any of the women in his life.
No, he's not good to any of them.
Even if we put aside the one I don't like, he's not good to any of them. And it's terrible. And I think we're meant to dislike him a little bit.
Yeah, we're meant to think he's a bit of a shit.
Yeah.
The storyline where she pretends that she's pregnant. Well, she isn't really pregnant, but she says she's pregnant.
Yeah.
It just seems a bit crazy girl trope that I didn't like. It made me feel a bit yuck.
I think, that's fair.
They're also quite mean to Jenny, the younger one, as well, which I didn't
mean.
love.
No, that is mean. I don't want to just defend every point. I agree they are mean and it's really uncomfortable. But I think, like, scenes like that are sort of meant to act as an opportunity for us to, like, understand the dynamics that are going on in the relationships.
Yeah.
Like, Tom and Claire in particular are clearly, like, bullying her and kind of ousting her because they are secretly in love with one another.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it on purpose or knowingly. Like, they don't know what the other is doing. But Claire clearly gets defensive because she's still in love with Tom and is a bit mean to Jenny on purpose. And Tom goes along with it because he's a shit.
Yeah.
And he's always going to be in love with Claire.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's uncomfortable, and I think it's meant to be. I think I don't think we're meant to side with them. I think we're meant to side with Jenny.
Yeah, we're meant to. Yeah, and Jenny, I like her as a character.
Same.
I also just think the joke itself hasn't aged well. Like, we can see her wings.
Yeah.
Like, back then, I probably would have gut laughed.
Yeah.
But now it's like pad humor. Get fucked.
Yeah.
Like, period. Everyone, we all have periods.
Yeah.
Get
true.
over it.
It's true.
One thing I wanted to ask is, could the show have been better if Rose had recovered and hadn't suicided? And when I say recovered, like in the show, because recovery doesn't just happen, it's a journey.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think, for me, no. Like, I think they could have made the choice, definitely, to have her in not an icky way, like not have like a triumphant recovery where now everything's great and she meets a new man and gets remarried and her life is wonderful for the rest of time. They could have done that. That would have been awful. I don't think Josh would have ever done that.
No.
They could have gone somewhere in between where we leave her in a space where she is kind of her normal self. She's having normal everyday struggles. Her and Josh have their funny little relationship going on. And we could have left them there, but I think for me it would have lost a lot of... Like I said, when I think about the show, I think about that event of her dying. And that is the thing that, like, sticks with me and had such a huge impact on me. I love the whole show, don't get me wrong. It's not like it's a slog to get to that point. But I think that some of the nuance around grief and loss that they showed, and around suicide in particular that they showed because of Rose's death, it would have been tragic to lose that.
Yeah. It was really important storytelling in the world we live in, and for people to see themselves in that, and for as a piece of cinema, but also as a piece of education almost.
Absolutely.
I think, if that hadn't been the way it ended, would have lost a little bit of that.
Agreed.
A lot.
Would have lost some of the heart. As much as, there's so many things along the way that are so wonderfully done and so impactful, I just do think we would have lost a lot by not having that part included.
I agree. And Josh actually says he always struggles with people who are like, what if she gets better? But that as a storyline is so difficult to tell on television because it's so messy and nuanced and it takes years. You don't get a triumphant moment where somebody who's bipolar or depressed is suddenly better. And that's correct. So,
exactly.
It's good that he thought that through as well. And I think he made the right choice. Well, should we go through our final scores before they kick us out?
Let's.
So, lived experience, do we think it gets a big tick?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
so. I mean, he wrote about his own life,
You couldn't get more lived experience.
Can't really argue with that.
Accuracy, I don't think I've got anything negative to say about accuracy.
I don't think so,
it's
other than maybe the panic attack, but I don't think that warrants...
that's the actor's problem.
Yes, I would agree.
Some people might disagree with me too. Stereotypes, I don't
think there's anything problematic.
No, not at all. I don't think so. Big tick.
Big tick.
Helpful versus harmful, I think.
Terribly harmful.
Oh, so don't watch the show. Don't watch it 5 times.
No,
and
definitely
be
not.
able to quote it verbatim. I think this gets full marks.
I think so. I can't think of anything that it should be punished for.
No.
And I think if I did, it would, like, be so minuscule.
I know.
In comparison to all of the helpful
like a
and
couple of
things.
lines that I don't like, you know.
Exactly.
It can't be perfect.
Yeah. Like maybe the psychologist, it's an unhealthy
True.
relationship.
But they do exist.
Is it inaccurate? I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah, exactly.
Particularly when it's that sort of severe clinical situation, maybe that is what happens for some. But, you know, not how I would do my practice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Elise.
Thank you for having me.
I need to tell all the audience too, we're now going to go see Jonathan Van Ness.
We are.
In the city. So
and have some tasty dinner.
It's going to be great.
It'll be wonderful.
And hopefully my laptop keeps this recording this whole time.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is not designed to be therapeutic, prescriptive, or constitute a formal diagnosis for any listener. For a longer version of this disclaimer, please check the episode notes on your podcast app.